So I'm Vitaliy Dyachuk. I'm an analyst at the Institute for Central European Strategy, and I'm also the editor-in-chief of the InfoPost Media, which is an outlet with information about Central Europe for Ukrainians and for Central Europe, our neighbors on Ukraine. So we're trying to reveal the information which is not known to our neighbors about Ukraine. I have the pleasure and honor to moderate this discussion, which definitely is the discussion not just on the engagement of Ukraine in the EU, but it's about the integrity of the European project as such. I will speak Ukrainian, and I will be using some of my notes. Sorry for that. So our discussion is dedicated to values. It's about neighborhood, but not just good neighborhood as a diplomatic gesture. It's about good neighborhood as a strategic category of security, taking into account the conditions we live in. We discussed both at this forum and at the Reopen Zakarpattia forum conducted by our institute about Central Europe as about a space where historical memory and interesting communication matter no less than defense budgets of the European countries. This is a space that may well become a new heart of Europe, but only in case we do not allow the outdated historical memory and new geopolitical temptations to create here a great zone of conflict. We now feel the consequences of the Russian aggression, and the ongoing war is not just the war for territories, that is actually the war for geopolitical identity of Europe. What our enemy is striving for is primarily to destroy trust in Europe. We can see this judging by today's news, and I'm happy that we can give a good alibi to our Hungarian friends who are staying with us today. In this context, any veto, including the Hungarian veto we are going to discuss on our path to the accession to the EU, has become something more than just a procedural barrier on Ukraine's way to the EU. It has become a kind of a test for the strategic vision of the integrity of Europe. It's important to emphasize that good neighborhood in Europe, as for now, is not just about common infrastructural projects, it's not just about cultural exchanges and educational programs, which we have and which are definitely important, but it's all more about our common understanding of our responsibility in history. Now, even in spite of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine shows that it's ready to have a dialogue. New doors are opened up for communication with national minorities. Our legislation is being polished. Ukraine is ready to reach a compromise even when Russian missiles are actually destroying Ukrainian schools. And now, the whole point is not whether Ukraine would like to become a member of the EU, but whether Europe is ready to become a part of the Ukrainian transformation, a part of the changes that are taking place in the current society, and a part of this fight and struggle. That's why we have to discuss a number of critical issues regarding interdependence between securing the rights of ethnic minorities and interethnic understanding, mutual understanding, in the background of the European integration processes, decolonization process, and in the background of the full-scale aggression. So all those interconnections were covered by Oksana Zabushko in her keynote speech. The second thing that needs to be emphasized is whether a European consensus is possible in the moment in time when the notion of good neighborhood actually is becoming an element of blackmailing, a blackmailing tool. And what should Europe be like in this sort of situation? And the third questions we have to consider is how to build the new policy, how to build the new strategy and the new infrastructure for good neighborhood in Europe. For us and for Europe to get new levels of influence, not just in terms of unblocking what is currently available or not blocking the enlargement of the EU, but in terms of showing the readiness for dialogue, for sharing experience, and for taking common responsibility for the historic challenges that we are now faced with. In our panel today, we have the speakers who definitely have not just an in-depth knowledge and expertise, but they are brave enough to openly speak on those topics. These are the representatives of the Ukrainian and Hungarian academic and political society, and we are representatives of other EU countries. So I hope that we will have a very meaningful discussion. But please bear it in mind that Ukraine's accession to the EU is not just a kind of a mercy or a gift or a diplomatic gesture. This is our common interest. The same as good neighborhood. It's not utopia any longer. It's a prerequisite, a precondition for survival in the geopolitical situation we are now faced with. And if we don't build new Europe based on trust, responsibility for your actions, following the principles of preservation of historical memory, and based on the values that we are fighting for, then tomorrow somebody can destroy the currently existing Europe, but it will be based on fear. Thank you. So let's have a discussion. And my first question will be for Csilla. We have long been acquainted with each other. We often attended open and closed events together, and Csilla has great experience in researching Ukrainian-Hungarian relationship. She used to work both in Ukraine and in Hungary. And Csilla, my question to you is as follows. What are the current objective, claims or requirements set for Ukraine? And let's start with the key things regarding securing the rights of national minorities. What is objective in those claims, or probably, and are the real requirements of Hungary based on those claims only? Let me just explain what I mean. Hungary used its veto right for the first time after the law on education was adopted in 2017, and the claims were mainly regarding one article, which was amended later, and in 2023 it just disappeared from our law. But the veto did not disappear, just vice versa. It's expanded, covering not just the European integration of Euro-Atlantic, but also the European integration of US. So what is the objective core in those claims? Thank you for giving the floor to me. So first of all, let me welcome all of you, and let me congratulate all of us on the Day of Europe. And probably my answer will come as quite unexpected. I guess we need to start with the 90s. Because then we will understand what my final statements will be about, though I will try to give my personal, subjective opinion regarding what is now happening with education issues. I don't know whether you're well acquainted with the fact that there is not just one Budapest memorandum, but there are two Budapest memorandums of agreements. The first came in 1990 about the maximum levels for the availability of ordinary weapons and ammunition. It was signed by Hungary, Poland, Czech Republic, the USSR, and a number of other countries. And currently, it's not clear whether it was also enacted and whether it became valid for Ukraine. I'm just mentioning this Budapest agreement because Ukraine definitely does not need it. The other one is the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, and we know that after the full-scale invasion, it appeared that this was just a fake paper with no valid power and with no importance because it could not help to stop the atrocities and the aggression launched by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. I agree with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France, Jean-Noël Barrot, who recently made a following statement. If a the country capitulates after it agreed to give its nuclear weapons in exchange of security guarantees, that will come as a signal that the only final security guarantee is possession of nuclear weapons, and this cannot be allowed. You have all heard some talks on that topic throughout Europe. And here, let me start answering your specific question. Well, we have the Hungarian-Ukrainian Basic Agreement of the year 1991 that declared the rights of national minorities and gave the mechanism for securing those rights and for having a discussion of all those tricky issues that arise as regards the rights of national minorities. So this document contains the mechanisms represented by the Interstate Commission on the problems of national minorities. This commission functioned till 2011, and then de jure it was still in existence, but de facto it doesn't have any meetings at all. After 2017, when the law on education was passed in Ukraine, they started organizing some new commissions, which were no longer interstate, but just some interagency commissions on education matters. And it started all anew every time. One commission had several sessions, and then everybody forgot about this commission. Then again, a new commission was established for it to have some sessions and to disappear. So I counted that there were four commissions like this, and every time they forgot that this commission was already in place, and both parties tried to introduce establishment of this commission as something new. Hungary started vetoing all the initiatives of Ukraine, and finally it found the Ukraine NATO Commission. And it's awful that after the full-scale invasion, it kept vetoing until this commission was dissolved, because you know that another commission was established after that instead of this Ukraine NATO one. Then the Venice Commission gave a recommendation regarding what needs to be done with the fact that Ukraine needs to make the rights of national minorities more fair in the form where not just the rights of indigenous nations and national minorities are acknowledged, but in the format when national minorities could be divided into Russian minorities and all the other minorities speaking one of the official languages of the European Union. But from 2020, Ukraine was waited until the end of 2023, and then finally, only then, it changed all the laws related to the minorities, following this formula, saying that the rights of minorities are valid for all the minorities who speak one of the official languages of the European Union. And then came the beginning of 2024, when we had a meeting here in Uzhhorod. That was the meeting of the high-level officials of Ukraine and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary. And all Ukrainians expected that a discussion will take place of the personal meeting between Mr. Orban and Mr. Zelensky. But it appeared that instead, that Rosierto, the minister, just shared an 11-item agenda, and then a year and a half elapsed, and over this time, no major all the major elements that constituted a barrier were removed from the Ukrainian legislation. Well, actually, there are no things in the European legislation that need a year and a half to work on them. It seems to me that for Hungary, that is just an excuse to which is used to prevent Ukraine's accession to the EU. And this is an issue to be speculated on for hours or for years. And I'm deeply convinced that there is some request in the background. I don't know whether this request was ever announced to politicians, but there should be a request. And I know about one item which is included into that request, but I can actually not give out this confidential information. I think that generally there is no barrier on the way to Hungary saying yes, but it will probably never be clear that those behind the curtain requests or items, the object of official discussion. So it seems to me that not the laws matter, but those background things matter. And when you were asking the question, I actually heard a joke about today's news. Well, I'm really sorry for that because don't think that all Hungarians are the same and that you need to provide the elevator to the Hungarian people. It's never the case, because if we take Mr. Yanukovych, it doesn't mean that all Ukrainians are like Yanukovych. That's why you should never associate one nation with uniform mass. Thank you. Well, probably this is the key statement that should be used in communication, not just with Hungarians, but with other neighbors of ours in order to establish context based on that statement. Thank you, Csilla, and my special thanks go to you for your Ukrainian. It's a pleasure to hear you speak Ukrainian. Always a pleasure. And I've got the question like this to Attila, because we are also interested in your point of view. Is there something behind those seemingly or allegedly reasoned Hungarian claims to Ukraine, or is there something deeper? And let me expand on this. Ethnic conflicts in different regions are used by Russia for many years, for decades. We can see this throughout Europe, but now we are interested in our relationship with Hungary. We are focusing on that. And I know that you have a book where you studied this issue, but through the prism of Hungarian-Romanian relations. So could you probably compare those two experiences? And could you also say whether the Hungarian government does realize that those barriers and those requirements constantly set for Ukraine in the expanded version are to the detriment not only of Ukraine but of the Hungarian government as well? In many cases, that is just the support of Russian propaganda.
Thank you very much for the invitation. It's not my first time here. It's maybe the fourth time, and I'm always happy to come back. And not the first time in Ukraine, maybe the 50th or 60th time. And not only in this part of Ukraine, but to the east. And I've seen the devastation in the east of Ukraine. I was visiting that in 2016, 2017, so before the full-scale invasion, but I saw destroyed towns. I saw destroyed villages near Mariupol. I've been to the front line near Donetsk in Pesky. So I saw what happened there. And since the full-scale invasion, I haven't been to the east, but I've been to Kiev, and I don't say I understand, but I felt for 5 days what is not to sleep because of the air raid. So I know what Ukraine, I don't know, but at least I know a bit, because you know, since you have people you lost, I don't have people I lost, but at least I have some understanding of what is happening in Ukraine. But as for your question, you have to see that there was, and I have to tell you a few personal experiences. I was working at NATO, at the Hungarian NATO embassy, when the first Russian invasion started in 2014. And I organized the first meeting between the then Hungarian Minister of Defense and the then Ukrainian Minister of Defense. And it was a good meeting on the sidelines of the NATO meeting. I remember what our minister said. I remember this because I've written it down to him. We write talking points to ministers that the only thing we ask from Ukraine is not to change the status of the Hungarian minority. And we got a promise. And we got a promise a lot of times after that. And 2017, when it happened, when this change happened, I was actually in Donbass with a Hungarian-Ukrainian mission. They showed us the front line. And that's when the news came. And it was an unhappy dinner with the Ukrainian delegation. So things changed then. And there was a bit of, so I understand that there is no trust for Hungary in Ukraine, but believe me that there is a bit of breach of trust because we were telling it from the first moment. And I know it because I was there. I was literally at the table when we were asking Ukraine just not to change this. So I understand the situation because I come here from time to time. I don't understand Ukraine like Csilla, but I do have some ideas. And please just see what Hungary is doing because you have a lot of news from Hungary, usually not the good news, but you could hear the good news too. So I heard the first speech, the first opening session when it was about memorials in Berehovo. Well, in Hungary, there are plenty of Ukrainian memorials with Ukrainian flag flying, the memorial of Princess Anastasia at Lake Balaton. He's shown as Ukrainian princess, not as Russian princess. He was a princess of Kiev. We have Taras Shevchenko memorial on the Taras Shevchenko Square in Budapest with Ukrainian colors. I don't think he was ever in Budapest, but it's in respect of the Ukrainian people. And there are many others. We have Ukrainian minority self-governments in all major towns of Hungary. And on the mayor's offices, you see the Ukrainian flag flying next to the Hungarian flag. The Ukrainian flag is flying in towns like Pécs, and Pécs is very far from the Ukrainian border, and I don't think there are more than 100 Ukrainians in that town. And the plaque is in Ukrainian language and Hungarian language. Hungary last year opened the first Ukrainian school and high school of the European Union beyond the borders in the current current European Union. And this was after the meeting of President Zelensky and Prime Minister Orban. And this school is now teaching 300 Ukrainian children in Ukrainian language in Budapest. And what Prime Minister Orban said that we open as many schools for Ukrainian children up to the age of 18 as it's needed. And the second school is under opening. And I don't know about such a school in any other European nation. So we should also look at this news. So I understand that some believe it's only a pretext. These issues are only a pretext, but look at what Hungary is doing. You will see the Ukrainian flags. You will see that Ukrainian students at the age of 18 can have the exams in Ukrainian in Budapest. We have a will to open, as I said, as many Ukrainian schools as possible. And again, all Ukrainian symbols can be used everywhere totally freely in Hungary. So you asked about my book, and yes, I think there is a power which is playing with these issues. But if you let it happen, it's not good for Ukraine and Hungary. But to talk about the subject of today, which is about EU integration, which is an important thing, I think, for Ukraine. I believe that we have to look at what happened in the past. So such debates, I understand for you it's something new, but in European Union it's full of debates. European Union is a place of very hard debates. If you look at Croatia and Slovenia, the two brother people, they both fought the Serbs in 1991. Croatia was occupied until 1995. And when Croatia started to join the European Union, Slovenia said, uh-oh, but we have a problem. And they had a problem, territorial problem and other problems. So Slovenia said, not if we don't solve it. Not if we don't solve it. Or in NATO, Greece had a problem with Macedonia. So it's not something, I don't want to say it's nothing, but it's something happening all over again in Europe, that two countries have a deep problem, even countries who were in terrible war. Croatia was occupied maybe 30% of Croatia by Serbian troops. It was a terrible war. If you go to Vukovar, I mean, of course, Croatia is a much smaller country than Ukraine. They suffered a lot. But still, the debate was between Slovenia and Croatia. So what I want to say that all debates can be solved, but the other side must be understood in a deeper way. And I think that's why I am happy to come to Ukraine. And I think more and more Ukrainians should come to Hungary and see what I talked about, because dialogue is needed. But to say that this is something special and unique in European Union, you have to see the last 30 years of European Union. It's a place of debate. It's a place of sometimes very harsh fights. And as I said at the beginning of my speech, I know what I don't know, of course, but I have some sense at least of what Ukraine is going through today. But you know, dialogue and understanding is really, really needed. So I'm happy that I'm here, and thank you for inviting me to this conference.
Thank you very much for your positions, for your view, and you have given an example of the Balkan countries, and you have been talking about the role of the EU. And my next question will be to Ms. Liubov. What is your opinion? What can be the turning point? What actions can become the turning point in this triangle? Ukraine, Hungary, the European Union, when we are discussing the issue of European integration. And what should be the role of the EU and its institutions? And whether our negotiation process might turn into another Macedonian scenario that actually took for more than a decade, and Ukraine will have to undergo a huge number of transformations. Good afternoon. Do you hear me? Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this forum, because I have never participated in regional events. Mainly, I participated in central events, and I'm not an expert on the Hungarian issue, on the Hungarian veto. And I would like to view this issue from the viewpoint of European integration. And I would kindly disagree with the previous speaker. I'm not going to talk a lot about the Balkan states, because we are going to hear soon Mr. Bieber from University of Graz, and there are lots of specialists there on the Balkan states, and they were actually teaching us about the story of those states. What I would like to start with, if we look at EU expansion policy, I agree with the speaker here. Even if we take expansion of 2004, when Poland and Hungary were accessing the EU, there were some problematic issues. There were lots of questions to Poland. Everybody was afraid of its agrarian sector. But I didn't see at that time the points of using vetoes from EU countries. When did it all start? It started with the Western Balkans. You, as the speaker, have mentioned the North Macedonia. Did you know when they started their process? In 2004. Do you know when it was unfrozen? In 2023. So the country has been waiting for 19 years. They have changed the name. It was Macedonia. Now it was North Macedonia. The constitution has been amended. Then Bulgaria was engaged, and so on and so forth. Then there were questions from Albania to Greece. From the viewpoint of Euro integration, is it related to European integration? No, it doesn't. Has anybody was it the case like this before? No. And for me, the expansion process takes place on two levels, political and technocratic ones. Accession is always the political decision, whether the European Union is ready or not. And all the manipulations with veto take place at the political level. Another point I would like to make. When the European Union approved the negotiation framework for us, and it was last year in June, And when I saw that it is actually the duplication of the Albanian framework and the principle of unanimous agreement is mentioned, I immediately understood that we are going to have those bilateral disagreements. So the European Union hasn't changed anything up till now. And I was at the event in Poland, and I voiced this idea the same. It was obvious for me as an expert, the conflict is already in the very negotiation framework. And from the Polish side, I have heard, well, these are the European procedures, you cannot change them. Well, we do respect the rules and regulations of the EU, but our risks are really high. The European Union was designed as the Union of Friends, and all the procedures written in a way that it is decided by 27 friends and nobody is going to block you. And I have practically never seen that the country was punished when something was violated. The EU is always trying to keep a certain balance. So if you ask me what can be the solutions regarding European integration, everything is quite obvious. Now everything is blocked by the unanimous principle when we are talking about opening of every cluster. There are 6 clusters, there are 35 articles. Well, everybody may say we are against, and it will take us more than 50 years to become the members of the EU if all the member countries will use this mechanism. So every EU member country can just initiate to review the chapter, the sector that has already been closed. So we do not need this unanimous principle to open these clusters. When there will be a final decision about the accession of the EU, this principle should be used, because I understand how important it is for the European Union. But another point. Yes, we should discuss the probably not the problems, but the challenges. Definitely, accession of Ukraine brings some challenges for the EU. And I always state, let's be honest. Do we want to see the European Union a strong union aimed at resolving the challenges? And that means the discussion should be built in a different way. How can we address the agrarian issue? And probably the European Union, together with Ukraine, will become the greatest exporter of the agricultural products in the world. How can we address the issues of technologies, of using robotic techniques? What is happening in the battlefield now? Or probably we should just have a discussion that Ukraine is a problem. But in this case, the European Union won't be probably very strong. What I'm afraid of is the process of robotization happening in China. I do not see this robotization process in the EU. Let's just imagine, God forbid, in 10 years, there will be Chinese robots coming to our borders, and there will be the war of robots. So who will be doing what? We have lots of challenges. When the European authorities say these are the rules and the regulations, that's clear, but somehow we should find approaches to resolve those problematic issues. The Central and Eastern Europe was very lucky in 2014 because there was no fundamental clusters. And now we have very complicated negotiation framework, so it may take us many years to access the European Union, even without any veto. They were really lucky to go through technocratic process of that time. I do understand the neighbors always have some problematic issues and some clashes. I think what is really important is for your neighbor to be a democratic one, not totalitarian one. For us, this negotiation process is the last chance to finish the political and legal reforms. There are 2 important things for Ukraine to become real democratic country. This is the reform, public administration reform and judicial reform. So please be good neighbors and help us to implement those reforms, because without this, I do not believe in post-accession tools and so on and so forth. No, we should do something here and now. And as civil society, we are ready to help. And it's really important for us not to be impeded on our way, but to be supported. It's necessary for you to just tell our authorities that political and legal reforms are really important. What is the weakness of the European Union? The way to the European Union is really complicated, but all the members of the EU have already covered that way, and everybody had the same conditions on that way. The problems start when you become the member of the European Union, because the EU designed in such a way that when you become the member, you share all those European values. And those who start neglecting those values, well, the European Union actually doesn't know what to do about such countries. So that's the key point. And it's really important for all the members to remember about those key values, and Ukraine should always remember those key values. And I agree with Ms. Liubov Akulenko that two sides should change on the way to the EU. I mean, the very European Union and Ukraine. And the clusters probably should be restructured and remodified in order to integrate both agriculture and other industries. We have already mentioned the reforms and structural changes in the country. Then my next question will be to Ihor, and probably he will give us more on this issue. Ukraine is trying to become the member of the EU, and many things have already been done. We are implementing the reforms, we build the political nation, and we talk about this all the time at different fora and different meetings. There are certain demands set to Ukraine, and those demands sometimes are bureaucratic ones, and we have still to implement them. There are also demands set by our neighbors, and also we should ask ourselves how we preserve what has already been built, and what should be the role of local authorities, some other authorities, and the very ethnic community.
Well, thank you for the invitation and for the possibility given to me to both listen to all the interesting presentations and to also tell a couple of words from my side. Let me start with a short answer to the question, what should be done with the Hungarian veto? And then I will try to expand on it and to give some reasoning behind my answer. So my answer is very, very simple. There is no solution to the problem that could be found in the bilateral relationship, and we should not be looking for the solution in the bilateral plane. That would be an absolute dead end. And not just from the point of view of the interest of Ukraine to accede the EU. This would be a dead end from the point of view of the objectives set for the existence of the EU. And now let me try and give several examples to show what I mean. The first panel that we had today gave us a number of insights and statements that could now be referred to. So Oksana Zabushko very aptly stressed the information about the sources of the European civilization. She spoke about the Canossa, about Roman law. Well, some write Canossa, the other people you say Horms, but the problem is actually the same because these two towns were dealing with the same problem. This was the problem of the Magdeburg, and then she mentioned the Magdeburg law and human rights, and kind of affirmation of nations from the times of the French Revolution. But when we read the current European thinkers, we quite often find references to the information saying that a current peculiarity of the European civilization primarily is the understanding and respect for the principle of added value and not the principle of the zero sum in the relationship. And if we keep to this stance, we come to realize that successful performance of your neighbor is always an advantage for you if you are both members of the European Union. But if we try to get back to each other, and if one country gets something, you then start considering that you have lost something, that will be the zero-sum principle, which is a way into nowhere, the way into the disappearance of any cooperation and any common coexistence in the European Union. That's why we should, as it seems to me, primarily have a look at this problem not from the point of view of a bilateral dialogue and finding a bilateral solution, because the problem is not only with Hungary. We will have similar issues in the agrarian agricultural sector with Poland. We will have some issues with other countries. And the way other countries like Croatia, Slovenia, North Macedonia had it, that will be repeated unless we all in Europe do not consider this problem and do not think what is better for Europe in general as an integral whole. Is it better to have Ukraine in the European Union or not? And there is a lot of space for thought. But again, from the point of view of the European interest as such. And let me recall you that the world has really changed. It became obvious when Trump came to power. It became obvious that we live in a totally different world. And it all depends on what the European Union looks like now, on whether it's able to become a leader in the democratic well. That will influence our future. Maybe all those who have gained trust in the new empires will divide the world between themselves, or do we still keep human rights, democracy, rule of law, and we will still have this European civilizational center that will still confess those values and that will make the whole world follow those values? So from this point of view, we need to be looking into the future and at the prospects of Ukraine's integration in the EU, the integration of the Balkan states in the EU, and at the transformations. I'm a lawyer. I'm actually an expert in governance, and it seems to be absolutely obvious for me that today is exactly the right time for a serious major reform of the EU itself. And here I'm talking about the decision-making process, because it cannot be the case that all the decisions are consensus-based. This is not an effective model to follow. And sometimes there should be unanimous decision-making, but sometimes this principle should not be followed. And there should be the reasoning for those exemptions. If the EU is not reformed now, it will not be the leader of the democratic world, and it will not keep the leading positions for which it has all the grounds as for now. And let me give a couple of other remarks in this context. These are rather my responses to the things heard by me. So today, my colleagues from Hungary reminded me of the fact that actually Mr. Orban came to power in 2010. But again, here is a parallel, and with us, Mr. Yanukovych came to power in 2010. We were also under the pressure of propaganda. Probably that propaganda was no less powerful than the one in Hungary. And we also have those draconic laws and the oppression of the rights of civil society organizations, but it all ended up in the Maidan and the Revolution of Dignity. So where is Yanukovych now? But Orban is still in power. So here the question arises, who confesses what values and who brings in more to the European democracy and who brings in less to the European democracy. That could be one of the stances on the basis of which we could be making some measurements. It's absolutely correct that nations cannot be measured or judged by Orbans or Yanukovychs. But I remember how I started my public activity at the end of the 80s, the beginning of the 90s of the previous century. In 1990, I went to Hungary many a time. I had a number of partners in Fedinec and some other parties and CSOs. We were learning from them. I was not personally acquainted with Mr. Orban, but for us, back then, he was like an icon to follow, a positive idol. So why, in the conditions of the European Union, it becomes possible for a person to undergo such a transformation? This is probably the problem that needs to be fixed by all of us. We should be looking for the safeguards, because if it happened in Hungary, that may well happen in other countries very soon. So that is something that will definitely be undermining the EU, and that is something that we should all together try to prevent. And the last thing, well, again, that's mostly for our foreign colleagues present here. Let me give you one more statement. Unfortunately, it seems to me that many people in the world, including in Europe, do not fully know and understand the historical context of the evolution of Ukraine and its establishment as an independent state. I can give you just one sentence here in this context. If you study the history of uniting of Italy and the formation of the Italian nation, and then you look through the history of the Czech Republic and see how the Czech nation evolved, and then you read the same information for Croatia, and then you read the real history of Ukraine, you will see that the process is absolutely the same behind the stage, but there was a time shift for some 10 or 20 years. And we Ukrainians are no different from all the other nations that also had some periods of statehood and some periods when there was lack of statehood. Now, well, some Trump followers keep writing that Ukraine for many years was under Russia. What is the problem of staying together for the future? But let me remind them that after we really stayed for some period together within the Kievan Rus state, but don't forget what role was played by whom in that state. So after that, for 300 years, we stayed separately until 1654, when we unfortunately met again, and we did not already understand each other. And here is my last statement. In this context, besides the talks about the values of Europe and the reform of Europe as the European Union, as the organization, we also lack, and here I'm trying to argue with what Oksana Zabushko said, we still lack the certainty and the clear delineation of the borderlines, of the boundaries of political Europe. I'm a lawyer and I'm an expert in public governance, so public administration, so I don't quite understand how we can delineate clear borders of Europe. So when we are thinking about the boundaries of political Europe, I think that the EU should pass a decision now, not just to make Ukraine a part of the political Europe, but it seems to me that Belarus should also have the same right. And I would say that even if there appears on the map this so-called Novgorod Republic, it should also have the same right, because it seems to me that in 1472 this republic was destroyed, was liquidated through genocide. Maybe it's going to resurrect one day. So the historical boundaries of Europe should be declared it should be stated that all the people who are in this territory and who meet the Copenhagen criteria and all the other follow the same values are entitled to be members of the EU. That would be a strong position coming from the EU as a global leader. Thank you. Thank you. I think that some European experience of what we need to borrow in the course of European integration will be shared with us by Florian. Florian, can you hear us? We're happy to see you. Very sorry that you're only online with us. We will always be happy if you come to Ukraine, to the Zakarpattia region, to be more specific. So we are interested in the following idea from you. In your works, we quite often have the notion of distorted European integration. So, what do you think if Ukraine tries to take into account all the requirements that for it and all the challenges it is faced with on its path to the accession to the EU? How could we possibly avoid the situation of distorted European integration? So let me try and explain for the audience what this term means, but maybe you will cover this notion in depth. So that's when the formal process of accession to the EU is there, but it becomes so much delayed with so much red tape and bureaucracy that all the in-depth changes are actually losing their sense. I mean, the rule of law and some other processes. And this is, again, a two-way process. When both from the EU, the level of bureaucracy gets higher, and in the country itself, though seemingly it is covered by those democratic values, but the country still preserves this autocracy. And under this bright cover, there are some hybrid modes embraced, and the country is trying to avoid in-depth transformations that it needs to take in order to accede to the EU, in order to synchronize with the EU values. So how do we avoid such a situation?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I myself would have also been like to have been with you in Ukraine. I would first maybe address the issue of the vetoes very explicitly, and especially my experience in following this topic in the Western Balkans, and then turn to the question you asked me about how to avoid this process, which is enlargement without an end, without a target in sight. As some of the colleagues over the panel have already mentioned, the veto use by member states is a fairly new phenomena. It is, of course, not unique to Ukraine. It's been used elsewhere. But what is interesting with the enlargement in 2004, it was attempted to be used by Italy against Slovenia and by Austria against the Czech Republic. But back then, the pressure was very strong from the other EU member states that the process should not be derailed by individual member states' grievances. Austria worried about the so-called Beneš Decree, which deprived property rights of German minority after World War II, and Italy was concerned about properties of Italians in Slovenia. Both of those were not evoked as vetoes because of the pressure of other EU member states. In the Western Balkans, as has been mentioned, there has been this veto used against North Macedonia, and it's still not resolved. It is very important to note that it's not off the agenda, and this is one important lesson I will come to for Ukraine. North Macedonia was first under veto by Greece over the name. It was resolved in the Prespa Agreement in 2018. But then subsequently, Albania and North Macedonia were blocked first by France, and once that veto was lifted, by Bulgaria. Bulgaria objected to the history, the language, and the existence of an independent nation of Macedonians. And this, in fact, I found very reminiscent of the arguments Russia and especially the Russian President Putin has made against Ukraine of denying the existence of another nation because based on dubious historical claims. There was a compromise forged in 2022 to allow the first step of the accession process for North Macedonia, but only the very first step. North Macedonia is still stuck. It is required, according to this compromise, to change its own constitution to include the Bulgarian minority, which is only a few thousand, into the constitution. But it has no guarantee that it will not be confronted with other vetoes by Bulgaria, because again, Bulgaria also disputes the existence of a separate language and so on. So What we're seeing is a use, or rather abuse, of these veto rights. Now, there are legitimate concerns of neighbors. There are the legitimate bilateral disputes. There are legitimate minority rights issues. All of them should be addressed, but there is a temptation of abuse because member states have considerable power over non-member states. They will never have the same leverage once they're in. So this is, of course, a dangerous moment of overreach by member states, and other members know that. Now, I think it's very important to keep in mind that not all bilateral issues need to be resolved before membership. It's, I think, a false assumption. One can live as members very well with open issues. I give you an example of two countries which were in the EU together for a long period of time, Spain and Great Britain. Great Britain, as you know, controls Gibraltar, and Spain never accepted sovereignty over Gibraltar. Now, this is a dispute over territory, not over just minority rights or a name. And still, Spain and Britain could live very well together in the European Union. And also, Slovenia and Croatia did not resolve their dispute until today. And nevertheless, they are very good neighbors, despite these open questions. So I think one should not be too obsessed of trying to resolve everything before membership. So the first big point I would like to make is that Ukraine needs to make sure that it gives no excuse for any country to use veto power, but then also realize how to avoid being in this trap. The first point is that try to prevent vetoes preemptively. And the best way to do this is have allies in other EU member states. So, I mean, first of all, of course, as I mentioned, address the legitimate concerns, and there might be some, but if they're illegitimate concerns, it is other member states who have the biggest leverage over other member states to prevent the abuse of veto powers. In the end, between North Macedonia and Bulgaria, it was France and Germany which were negotiating. The EU itself cannot mediate between its own member and a third country. So Ukraine needs allies in the European Union to help it preventing the abuse of the veto power. And I think Ukraine is in a much better position than many other smaller countries seeking to join the European Union. But possibly, in a certain way, getting together a group of countries which want to enlarge, so seeing Ukraine together with the Western Balkan countries and seeing, trying together to lobby against the use of these veto powers by individual member states would be beneficial. So in a certain way, acting as a group rather than just individual, because all countries who seek to join the EU have the same worries and the same concerns. So it's about pressure against those who are abusing those powers, and I think it could be any EU member state for whatever reason, domestic politics. The second point is changing the way the EU operates. And the new German government might be a partner in that. If you look at the coalition agreement of the new German government, it said very clearly that it wants to reform the EU before membership. Now, you can read it negatively and can say the German government is not prioritizing enlargement, but you can read it positively. You can read it as the German government is interested in changing the way the EU functions. And one of the concerns which was articulated by the joint Franco-German expert paper was too many unanimity requirements in the European Union, in particular during enlargement. So this is something where we can find allies in the EU to change the process, not to abolish the unanimity, but to reduce it, to have a lot fewer veto points, which give less opportunities for abuse by member states. So this is something where I think the Ukraine has a great interest in having these veto points reduced in the formal procedures of the European Union. So to answer your question, the best way to avoid this frustrated Europeanization is one where you don't have a veto, where you're not blocked, where you don't think you're waiting outside of the European Union, not because of the failure of reforms, but because of reasons which have nothing to do with domestic preparedness in terms of rule of law, democracy, and other elements. This is the best way. And of course, I think what is very clear is that you see the frustration in a country like North Macedonia, which has been a candidate country of the European Union for 20 years, right? 20 years without actually negotiating accession. You don't want to be in that position because your citizens will lose hope in the European process. So I think also EU cannot afford a Ukraine which is embittered and frustrated about the EU process. And I think this is very important to also communicate to European decision makers, including in the member states, to say, you know, you can maybe live with a frustrated Macedonia, but you cannot live with a frustrated Ukraine, which is doing everything it can, if it does indeed do so, while it is blocked because of bilateral or other issues which have nothing to do with the merits of its cause. So that is something which I think needs to be seen as a risk for the European Union itself, not just for Ukraine. So keeping the momentum going, and then, very importantly, seizing the opportunities when they exist. Because again, vetoes are often linked to individual governments. I think the position would be very different in a new Hungarian government who came to office. And we saw a similar shift when the Polish government changed recently when it came to Ukraine. So again, when governments change, policies change, and it's important to use that momentum to seize the opportunity and not to let the opportunity go to waste, because the risk is that no change is forever, and that might bring future vetoes. So seize the moment when it exists, when it opens itself with more cooperative governments, more willing European-oriented governments, and at the same time find allies in the European Union to make sure the process remains merit-based. And finally, as I mentioned in the beginning, build alliances among other accession countries to have, in a certain way, a larger, stronger voice in the capitals of the European Union for your cause, to avoid this sense of frustration and eternal waiting to join the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Florian. And I do have some other questions to our foreign colleagues. So I'm talking about the local level. We have a slogan, think globally, act locally. And all the countries, including Hungary, have very valuable experience of becoming a member of the EU. So when we are talking about specific steps at the local level, what do we lack? What do we lack in cooperation with the Hungarian community? And I'm talking also about the Transcarpathian region. What are the specific steps that can be taken here and now in order to somehow please Budapest, in order to reduce that veto, and in order to build more constructive dialogue? And probably we shall also ask the same question to our audience, but a bit later. So please, Attila and Csilla. In my opinion, it's necessary to mention the point that the person is in power for so many years that he rewrites all the laws to his own needs. And it's a very difficult algorithm when 1 + 1 is no more 2. And the situation is related to the majority in parliament and so on and so forth. For all those 14 years, we didn't have the opposition as such. There were some parties, but they did not contribute a lot to the political life of the region or of the country, or they contributed just little. And even those opposition parties have been supporting Ukraine and have supported Ukraine, but it's not understandable whether they really know what Ukraine is, or they just go with the flow in the EU. And if the EU supports Ukraine, then they support Ukraine as well, following the European example. Coming back to the agreement between Ukraine and Hungary, there were attempts to rewrite it, to change it in 2018 and 2024. Well, probably some formulations can be rephrased, but the very content actually meets the current situation. But this is bilateral agreement. And the issue of Ukraine's accession to the EU, well, here we have the bilateral point, and I think that it should not be bilateral, it should be multilateral. Regarding the Hungarian community in Transcarpathian region, we are not talking about common people. We are talking about the politicians who are related to Orban, to funding, and they are not going to do anything that won't agree with the Budapest statements. And I do not see here those Hungarian politicians. And even if the other ethnic groups and communities sit at the table and discuss different problems, they are not there. There is a special conference organized for the Hungarian community, and it's also wrong. Regarding Hungary, do not think that the people in Hungary do not know about Ukraine. You go to the shop, well, there are lots of scientific books. They write about Ukraine, and these books are really good. We also have translated literature. And we also have our own literature written about Ukraine. Now we have lots of fiction, Ukrainian fiction, translated into Hungarian, which is popular among people. For example, I'm talking about Serhiy Zhadan's novels and Oksana Zabushka's books. In 2022, my colleague Peter Pasto and me translated her essay, How One Should Read the Russian Literature. And I honestly would tell that it was difficult somehow to find the publishing house because nobody wanted to publish it. And again, we have the dominant media, and the opposition media are just few, but these opposition media portray Ukraine in a positive way. And they do not just look at Ukraine from Budapest, but the very Hungarian journalists come to Ukraine and act here at the local level. And they do not come only to Transcarpathian region, but they go to the front line as well. And there is, for example, an edition, Palace Online, and I draw your attention to this. They have even written a book about very important interviews, and they invited the best scholars to write about modern Ukraine. So they wanted to show modern Ukraine, and this book is popular. So people read about Ukraine, people have knowledge about Ukraine. But yes, there are some problems. In 2017, the law of education was adopted, and I was very cautiously saying that the idea is good, but it's not the European method. And people started calling me different names, so the reaction was very negative. Now, I'm stating certain things, and people in Hungary do not support me. And, well, I'm just saying certain things openly, but quite often I do write about those things. Anyway, everything will be available, and people tend to read more than to listen more. I think that, first of all, we all have to be humans, and only then we should think about some other questions. And I want to add one more thing about the European Union. Here, we have mentioned the idea that there should be some reformations, but please remember that there are lots of right-winged forces, and they want also to change the European Union and to transform it into something else. And we have to address this issue as well. So What will happen to the EU, in my opinion, is directly related to the safety and security architecture in Ukraine. There won't be Europe without Ukraine, at least the Europe we see it now. There won't be democracy, there won't be many other things. Lots of things are changing in the world, and Europe will definitely benefit when Ukraine becomes the member of this community. Thank you very much. Mr. Attila, could you tell us, do they hear in Budapest the voice of the Hungarian community from Transcarpathian? And can these two communities, Hungarian in Ukraine and Ukrainian community in Hungary, become a bridge that will enable us to improve our relationship, and how we can use it for the benefits of two countries? Well, now I will just speak as a person, not as a scientist, not as a scholar. You see that the Hungarian community probably is a bit closed here in Transcarpathian. It doesn't communicate with the other communities. And I will open a secret to you, but please do not quote me, do not tell anybody else that I have said it. But this is the way the Ukrainian community behaves in Hungary. They communicate among themselves. But in Hungary, there are better conditions, there is no war.
In Hungary, we do have national self-government bodies which get quite an amount of money. And those Ukrainian communities, the same as Hungarians here, are all the time quarreling in between. But they have good conditions to live the way they want and to share their bread, so to say, the way they want. My impression is that we hear some talks about having mirror conditions. I mean, Ukrainians in Hungary and Hungarians in Ukraine should have the same conditions regarding the parliamentary mandate. I'm not sure that for Hungarians of Ukraine, it would be good to have the same things that they have as the Ukrainian minority has in Hungary. Because in Hungary, we don't have many national minorities, and let's say Germans cannot get their parliamentary mandates. That's why they have created the position of the speaker of the parliament representing a national minority. That's what each national minority has. They are speaker in the parliament, but the national minority doesn't have the right to vote or to speak otherwise. Even the speaker can speak only before the plenary session. I don't know why the mandate is like that. You probably need to create a constituency where Hungarians in Ukraine could be able to elect a parliamentarian, a speaker. And I'm talking not only about the Hungarian minority, but about all the other minorities as well, for us to have a full-fledged mandate. And I can tell you more. In Hungary, besides linguists who deal with social studies, area studies, and besides me, there are no people who speak Ukrainian. While in your society, we have a number of Ukrainians who also don't speak Hungarian. So how is it possible for you to learn what is happening in Hungary? You either trust me or you trust mass media, but you cannot learn it yourselves. Because you can speak about a lot of things. You can write a about a country in a different language, but you will never learn that much truthful information, and you will not learn the cultural codes of the people otherwise if you don't know their language. The nation is about the language. I agree with this statement. And, I didn't study Ukrainian. I didn't have any courses. I didn't study it at school. I just learned it on my own. And I realized that learning words is nothing. You need to be able to read cultural codes of the nation. You need to read tabloids, to read political press. You need to know who, where, and what. And then you will be able to at least discuss a number of issues. I know what are the things that come as an axiom for you, and I know what are the issues that need to be discussed and explained. And I can figure out what audience may need some explanations on what matters. But if you want to know something about the neighboring countries, but you don't know their language, nothing will happen. So something needs to be changed about that situation. The approach needs to be changed. You need to have more meetings with the people, with the representatives of the neighboring countries. You need to pay visits to each other. And, well, I cannot tell that I may invite you because I'm now working in the institute that is probably the last institution that has not been under the pressure of the Orban's government. But last year, actually, the new law was adopted, so I don't know what will happen. And suppose after my visit here, I don't know whether I'm still employed in the institute or no. Csilla, anyway, you know where you can come and where you will be heartily welcomed. I can see that Ihor has a comment to your speech. Yes, thank you. That's just a brief remark. Let me note that, unarguably, the rights of national communities really matter a lot. These rights should be guaranteed at the national level in each country, but that, however, doesn't mean that all the countries should, on a mandatory basis, secure those rights at the institutional level. Suppose there is a majority election system in the country, at least you may ensure no abuse in terms of the constituency geography, and in order not to reduce the possibility for a national minority to be represented. But if a country has a proportionate election system, and all the more if there is the general national list, then there is no automatic representation. There can be no automatic representation from the technical point of view. Nevertheless, knowing that a certain national minority has a sufficient number of votes, parties always are interested in having on their list a representative of that specific minority. I don't remember the specific names of Hungarians on the party lists, but I guess many of them were present in the parliament of Ukraine. And for many years, I had a very good relationship with Ivan Popescu, who was the representative of the Romanian minority in Ukraine, and he was an MP of Ukraine. He went to the election representing different parties at different elections. Sometimes I had arguments with him because he was also representing the party of the regions for a period of time. But nevertheless, he told that my core mission is to represent the Romanian minority, and I'm working on that. And there were no barriers on his way. He did it within the framework of our legislative system. I think that this discussion could go on and on. That's really true. I think that this was his own initiative But I think that actually it should not be the case that people are just on the list, but they should have this individual opportunity. We have taken away the opportunity from Attila to speak, so I would ask you to kind of wrap up our discussion in the context of the votes of the community of the minorities in terms of establishing a dialogue between our countries.
So just as for the Hungarian system, I think if the minority is big enough, they can elect a representative to the parliament. So I think there was a German, definitely, in the Hungarian parliament. And if there is a minority which is growing, in a way, unfortunately, in Hungary is the Ukrainian, since there are so many Ukrainians now in Hungary. The minority was very small before, it's a few thousand. And now we have at least, it depends, the numbers, but they're around 100,000. So it's way, way bigger than it used to be. I'm hopeful that most can return to a peaceful and prosperous Ukraine, but some Ukrainians will stay for long. So there is more Ukrainian presence. You can hear it on the street. And definitely there can be a bridge, because I think those Ukrainians who come to Hungary as refugees or as to work, most of them will have a good experience. They can celebrate their nation, their language, their flag, their symbols without restriction. If you come to Hungary, as I see, you will see Ukrainian flag, Ukrainian language on mayor's offices. It can be done. There is a radio, there is Ukrainian in the radio. There are many other things in Hungary. There is no restriction. And if there can be a moment of getting close, I think Hungary is ready to give even more rights to the Ukrainian community. And they are recognized as a national community equal. Like any other nation that we have, I think, 13 recognized nationalities in Hungary. So yes, I think both the Hungarians here can be a bridge, and the Hungarians and the Ukrainians in Hungary can be a bridge. And it is very important to come to Hungary and see these things, because what I saw in both countries' media is that some people write articles about the other country without ever visiting it. And it would be, I think, good for more Ukrainians to come to Hungary and see that Ukrainians are treated with respect. In Hungary, you will not find what many Ukrainians think in Hungary. You will find much better conditions than in several European countries, I have to tell, for the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian minority in Hungary.
Thanks a lot. And since we're talking about democracy, I think it would be non-democratic to take away the right of the audience to ask questions. So we've got only 5 minutes for that. If you have any immediate questions, please ask them. Everything seems to be clear, but we have one question from Andras. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will speak English. Well, that is such a complicated question, but I need to tell the truth. So if we take the association agreement, do you understand Ukrainian? Okay. So in the association agreement, because we do the monitoring of it, there are 450 acts. We started signing all of them in 2014. We finished our monitoring at the beginning of the war because now nobody is that much interested in the association agreement. So as of the beginning of the full-scale aggression, we had about 50% accomplished. And we cannot state that this is really 50% in terms of full implementation. It's like the average temperature in the room. If we had a look at the breakdown, of the implementation of those acts. So we could see that before the war, we actively implemented the parts related to trade and commerce, but we did not touch the political bloc because the EU acquis is too much complicated for the post-Soviet countries, and you cannot just take them and adjust them without having the view of accession. And Ukraine is a large country with a number of groups of interest. Not everybody is happy to protect migration birds if we're not taking to our path towards the EU. At the beginning of the war, the government mentioned that in the course of the accession, we need to adopt 3,000 acts. Then the figure was 20,000 acts. I can tell you that over the period starting with 2014 up to 2022, we did not manage to implement 450. But the preconditions there were different. There was no motivation to adopt all those acts. And I think that every time enlargement is about political readiness and prioritizing. For me, the most important thing, well, I don't know when the EU is ready to accept us. Will it be in 2030 or 2035? But for me, the most important thing is for the EU to focus on this cluster of fundamental reforms and in the judiciary and in public administration, because the anti-corruption component has been so much advertised that we have so many anti-corruption institutions that not a single EU member state has. So that would be my answer. I don't know how much time we will need. Probably 20 years to fully comply with all the requirements. I will support Liubov, but let me give you a number of statements as well. Definitely, I don't know how many years we will have to spend on the adoption of all those EU acquis acts, but definitely we will work on that. We will do our best, and we, as experts of civil society, will keep helping the government, and will kind of incentivize this to have more in-depth reforms. But in this context, when we're talking about the future of the EU, I would advise all of us to also think about another aspect of the EU reform. Is it okay that from year to year, more enlargement comes to the field of common policies of the EU? Is it really in conformity with the objectives set when the EU was being established? And does it really correspond to the principles of subsidiarity, to put it briefly? You could read Roger Scruton with his explanations of why the UK should leave the EU. It seems to me his papers include a number of relevant statements, a number of relevant comments. So we need to be thinking about the EU reform. Well, we are supposed to do our home assignment to harmonize our legislation with the EU acquis, but the EU acquis should be also going forward to us or to other candidate countries and reform itself in terms of the common policies. Definitely. So we have reached the conclusion that integration is a two-way process. I'm really grateful to our panelists. Thank you, Florian, for staying with us online. Thank you, dear offline participants. And one more request is coming. On your seats or at the registration desk, you have a short survey developed by our partners. Please fill it out because we are really interested in your opinions. Thanks a lot.